Hello and welcome to German Lessons with Mr. Ferguson. Hallo und herzlich willkommen zum Deutschunterricht mit Herrn Ferguson. Diese 7. Stunde über die Zeitformen, the 7th Tenses Lesson, ist, wie man den Konditional mit Modalverben benutzt. How to use the conditional tense with modal verbs. Teil 3, Part 3. In the first 2 lessons of this series about the conditional, or subjunctive, which is known as Konjunktiv in German, we learned about how to use the subjunctive with the verbs werden, haben and sein. If you've not seen those videos yet, please click here to watch part 1 now. In this lesson, we're using the imperfect subjunctive, or Konjunktiv II, with modal verbs. To recap, the modal verbs are können, to be able to, müssen, to have to, dürfen, to be allowed to, wollen, to want to, sollen, to ought to, and mögen, to like or to like to. And to form the imperfect subjunctive with modal verbs, it's worth recapping how to put modal verbs into the imperfect tense. If you need to do this, please click here now. To put modal verbs into the imperfect tense, we remove the en, remove the umlaut, and then add the regular imperfect tense verb endings. In order to form the imperfect subjunctive of the modal verbs, it's extremely easy. All you need to do is skip the remove the umlaut step. So let's look at können as an example. Step 1, remove the en. Können becomes können. Step 2, add the relevant imperfect verb ending. So with ich, we say ich könnte, which means I would be able to, I were to be able to, or I could, depending on context. The other ich forms of the modal verbs, therefore, are ich müsste, I would have to, I were to have to, and sometimes I had to. Ich dürfte, I would be allowed to, or I were to be allowed to. Ich wollte, I would want to, or I were to want to. Notice that this form is identical to the imperfect version, which means I wanted to. The meaning of this verb form, therefore, depends on context. Ich sollte, I ought to, or I should. Notice again that this verb is identical to its imperfect form, which meant I was supposed to. So the meaning of this verb depends on context too. Ich möchte, I would like to. Ich möchte is a very commonly used phrase in German, heard in a number of different situations, but particularly while shopping, ordering food and drink, and using public transport. Let's look at some examples. Wenn ein Auto hätte, könnte nach Deutschland fahren. If he were to have a car, or if he had a car, he would be able to drive to Germany. Wenn wir jünger wären, müssten wir zur Schule gehen. If we were younger, we would have to go to school. Wenn Sie zur Party gehen dürften, wären Sie nicht so verärgert. If they were allowed to go to the party, they would not be so angry. Was möchten Sie essen? What would you like to eat? So, that's how to use the subjunctive with modal verbs. It's a good idea to pause this video now to recap the subjunctive or Konjunktiv II forms of the modal verbs, as well as how you might use them in context. Habe ich etwas vergessen? If you're a native German speaker and think I've forgotten something important about the imperfect subjunctive with modal verbs, please let me know in the comments. Bitte schreibt einen Kommentar. Also, please don't forget to click subscribe to receive all of my German lesson videos, language learning tips and updates. To move on to the 4th and final part of this lesson covering the imperfect subjunctive forms of common verbs and when to use them in set phrases, please click the thumbnail in the video. Otherwise, from me, it's Danke und auf Wiedersehen.